Welcome, everybody, to lesson 20 of class when creativity and logic have babies. So let's get into this, shall we? So, when creativity and logic have babies, they create art and science. Now, remember the acronym here because we're going to start putting this together. But as we move into, art and the lessons that come with that in lesson 21, so on and so forth, we have to get some type of understanding of how we could bring the both creativity and logic into understanding, well, how does this create art and science? Because remember, you go to school and you learn about creativity first, you learn about logic later in high school, sometimes around seventh, eighth grade, but then you get a bachelor's degree in the arts or sciences. And then when you have a family, you decide to wonder about a spirituality a little bit. So, what happens when creativity and logic have babies? Well, one of the things you have to understand is which baby are they having first? Is it art or science? And then how do you communicate to that child? Well, if it's a more artistic, remember, art is more about emotion, feeling, and understanding, whereas science is more about logic, facts, used in order to bring understanding. So I'll say that last part again. Art is more about emotion and feeling and understanding, whereas science is about logic and facts used to bring understanding to people. Because sometimes, yes, you could tell a beautiful story or make an image, so on and so forth, but if you can't prove it with facts and documentation and paperwork and logic, so on and so forth, then it's going to be real hard for the scientific people to understand what is actually being said or to understand what is actually being shown to them. So let's move forward, right? Now that we have that understanding, we have to understand that both of them seek understanding, right? But they both have different modes of going about it, right? In order to help people understand things in the world, you need to use emotion and logic, right? L, emotion and logic, E and L, so on and so forth. The artist needs emotion, whereas scientific people need logic. And what do I mean by that? You ever met an artistic person or somebody who is captured in the arts and then all of a sudden they go to a play and it makes them feel something amazing and they come out so energized, so on and so forth? That's an artistic person and they got an emotional response from that. Here's another thing. If you study science, preferably psychology, so on and so forth, when it comes to the short and long term memory, if you want something to stay with somebody for a long time, you have to trigger an emotion that will go ahead and get it uh, put into a different category outside of short term memory. This is why you need both emotion and logic. Yes, it makes sense, but how long will that sense last? If you remember, there was a TV show called Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? And in the show, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? They had adults compete against fifth graders, asking them very simple questions that were logical that they should have remembered over time. But because there was no emotion drawn towards it, 9 times out of 10, they would either get the question wrong or they forgot about it, so on and so forth. And you could see this within the show and the way the dynamics of the show play out. Now, if you combine the two, you get magic and connection. What do I mean by that? You ever seen a beautiful play? I'll put this right here for now. You ever seen a play or, let's say, what's the famous play that came out? Um, Alexander Hamilton on Broadway. It's something that brought an emotion out of people. It not only educated them with logical facts that came from history, but the way the story was told made it a #1 Broadway hit. Now, because of that, that's where the magic and the connection came into place because when people went to go see it, yes, the logical people were pulled in too because they already had logic of history and proven fact, which is used in law, known as case law, meaning it's happened before, so they use history to defend something else. And then, of course, it had emotion because it had music, it had singing, it had dancing, it had costumes, it had people playing the parts that they were trying to depict to give a better understanding of the situation that they're trying to discuss while on stage. That's the magic and the beauty of art, and that's why the arts are so successful, especially when they do it well. The reason why the arts help out sciences is because sometimes the scientific people aren't very creative because they're heavy on the logical side. So if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it must be a duck unless they were trained or educated by the arts starts to look at it a different way. So let's go forward, shall we? Now, what do I mean by when you combine these things, you get magic and a connection? Well, if you've seen any of my other videos, I talked about, is there magic and spirituality? Remember, that's the last part of this, right? So when you talk about magic and spirituality, you kind of pull in some of the artistic people because they could go ahead and kind of understand what's going on, whereas the scientific people want to take everything apart, not realizing that people use different terminologies for different things. If you remember, there was a video I did that I talked about electrons, neutrinos, and quarks, and how those all come together. But then in other spiritual teachings, such as Christianity, you have the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And Alexander Dumas's literary works, you have the Three Musketeers and how they work together, so on and so forth. And then, of course, everything goes on and on and on, especially with different cultures, so on and so forth. Why is three so important? Well, it's the fundamental building blocks. And with three points of contact, you also know if you're a rock climber or you're climbing something, you need at least 3 points of contact to make sure you have a secure grip onto whatever it is that you're trying to climb. So it's very beneficial to understand that, and not only understand it, but make the connection so that it's logical for the scientific people. Now let's recap creativity and logic. If you remember in creativity, one of the first episodes I taught was on perspective and perception. And hopefully throughout creativity, you got to learn a lot from the lessons there and ways to change your perceptions on things, to change your perspective. Because remember, with creativity, creativity can beat logic because it's very black and white, right? It's like dealing with accounting or dealing in a courtroom, so on and so forth. It has to be very black and white. There's no room for error or room for the gray, as they say. So if creativity could beat logic, then creativity plus logic can beat art and science, but spirituality beats them all because of teamwork and understanding. Let me make some connections for you with this. When I talk about creativity and logic beating art and science, you have to understand when you combine creativity and logic, you get art and science, right? So if you keep it simple, right, or if you keep it stupid simple, the KISS acronym that they use in sales, you would understand this. Now, when it comes to art, if you want to beat somebody in art, you have to tell a better story that's a little bit more logical so that people could figure not only things out more easily along the way, but they have a better understanding as the story plays out. If you're trying to beat a scientific person, you have to have more logic with some creativity to help them understand in the way that they communicate, hence the creativity part, so that they could shift their perspective and educate their perceptions of the world. Now, once they get their eyes open, they realize that it's not magic, it's science, and so on and so forth. There was a quote, I think it was in one of the Avengers, where Thor said, "What you call magic on your planet is something we call science on mine," because anything that has not been identified and defined by science and mathematics is indistinguishable from magic. And that's one of the things that we have to understand, because our world is ruled by symbols, signs, and meaning. So let's get into that. When it comes to symbol, signs, and meaning, you have to understand that where the mind goes, the body will follow, right? So you train the mind, you train the body, and now you have a more durable resource and power and energy source to work off of. But if you put bad stuff into your mind, and then of course your body follows, how is that going to play out along the way? So looking back at creativity and logic, you can see how story can beat anyone not in the know because of perspective and perception. Remember, some people have a limited vocabulary and others have a vast vocabulary, but over time they get segmented and niched down into specific categories. So their vocabulary for certain industries or for certain fields might excel in certain areas, such as a doctor, an attorney, a financial planner, and the list goes on and on. And then, of course, those that are more in the liberal arts that study almost everything, that have more of an open creative mind and had a lot of exposure therapy done to them, they can understand a little bit more and they probably have more of the know. Or last but not least, let's say a student going into college, into a class in which they don't understand, the teacher has more know than the students. So when the teacher's explaining something, you have to not only pay attention, you have to understand the words that they're using, because remember, they're only talking from their own perspective and their perceptions, not only of the world, but of their education as well. So even in marketing, when we get into it, we talk about making things as simple as possible, especially things like headlines and the creative, the images and the video. You want to make them simple so that people understand them and it still gets the message across. Now, why is this important? Well, because as we move into art and things like that, you're going to have questions. You're going to question why the Mona Lisa smiles, what makes art so valuable, what makes Bitcoin so valuable, so on and so forth. And if you're getting any value out of this video, go ahead and smash that like button and don't forget to follow me so that you can go ahead and not only benefit from the rest of the lessons that are going to come forth in class, but so that others can go ahead and benefit from it as well. So because of this, we have to understand that speech is a vital form of communication. If you can spread a positive message, go ahead and do it, because not many people can. Not many people have the audience to spread that positive message that'll not only make an impact in the world, but that will slightly change it just a little bit for the better. Because remember, the scales are always tipping, good or bad, so on and so forth. And right now they're out of balance, as most people would say, right? So you have to understand that those that have the ability to speak, now is the time for you to speak. Those who have the ability to understand and hear, now is the time for you to start paying attention and listening to what is going on, if that makes sense. So let's revert back to what I was trying to say earlier, because I don't want people to get offended as they're watching this video. But if you remember, we had the electrons, the neutrinos, and then we had the quarks, right? But is there magic in spirituality? Because all I did was draw 3 circles on the board that kind of look like a diagram, right? But if I make the center part stand out to people right here, right, it kind of looks like the charmed symbol, if you ever seen the TV show Charmed, which talks about witchcraft and magic, so on and so forth. But I was just talking about science. Yeah, because you have the electron, the neutrino, and then you have the quarks. As those come together, that also formulates the atoms, the cells, and everything else in the body. So yes, it's in everything, and it's also everywhere at the same time, just like in spirituality, right? You have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's everywhere and in everybody at the same time, so on and so forth. And of course, if you want to do wordplay, you can say Adam came before Eve, so on and so forth, because if you spell Adam, Atom, then yes, Adam came before Eve. Every atom came before the subject or the mass put itself together, right? With matter, so on and so forth, gravitational pull, etc. But it wasn't without these 3 fundamental particles, or I should say smallest elements, particles that you want to describe them as, coming together to create that thing, right? So let's keep moving forward, but I want to leave this here so that you guys can understand where I'm getting at when it comes to combining creativity and logic, because yes, this is a creative thing, and I'll make this actually a little bigger here so that you guys can see it on camera. So let me go ahead and just clear this off. Now remember, we have the electrons, which are over here, and I'll put a little E. We have the neutrons here, and I'll put an N. And then we have the quarks here, and I'll put a Q. And then we have this symbol in the middle where they all intersect, right? Now, this may rub some people the wrong way, so on and so forth, but you have to remember that your goal in this lesson, in class itself, is to understand. Remember, if you do not strive to understand, you will understand nothing. So always remember that as you move forward, right? Now, people need something to keep them going in life, or they stop growing. As Tony Robbins says, if you're not growing, you're dying, right? So in life in general, right? Whether it's art, science, or spirituality, which uses creativity and logic all the time, people need something to keep them moving forward. If not, they get depressed, they go down the spiral, so on and so forth, etc., and it's not good. So when I talked about spreading a positive message, if you have the ability to do so, then do so. Now let's go into other areas, right? The Greeks, they had Zeus and Hercules, whereas today we have things like Star Wars and Harry Potter. But how does that all come together? Because in every movie, the way it comes together is there's a good force and there's a bad force. And there's always a fight between the two, right? But there is a fine line in the middle. In Star Wars, you have different types of Jedi and you have people that fight, so on and so forth. You know, they're with the Republic and all this other stuff. Then in the Greek time, you had the gods and you had the Titans. You had Kronos, who was defeated by Zeus. You had Hercules, whose job it was to do the 12 deeds or the deeds or whatever, so he could gain his powers and excel in life. You had Odysseus that had to go through trials and tribulations, so on and so forth, etc., before returning home and eventually getting back to his wife. These are the things that people look up to that inspire them to do more, or that they look at to get them out of a dark place. Some people may lose themselves in a fantasy like Harry Potter, and that might inspire them to either write a book, get into magic and performing, or to understand science more so that they could benefit others, etc., because it looked cool on camera. Remember this: tomorrow lies in the beauty of our dreams, right? And the reason why I say that is because without tomorrow, or the expectation of tomorrow, right? And the dreams that we have when we go to sleep at night, what will we have to talk about and think about throughout the day tomorrow, right? So you go to sleep and you dream about something, and then you go out and you're supposed to connect with other people. It's how cells and living organisms survive. They connect, they communicate, they survive off of each other sometimes, depending if they're omnivore, carnivore, so on and so forth, etc., or herbivore, whatever it's called. But you have to remember that tomorrow lies in the beauty of our dreams. And if you don't have nothing to strive for tomorrow, how are you going to get through today? So you have to remember these things, especially if you're in certain fields, right? Whether that's art, science, or spirituality, you have to remember there are people out there that are looking for something to keep them going. And this is something that you can go ahead and apply. If you see this video, you can go ahead and share it with everybody else, because this is how we bring people together, especially the people in the scientific field, bring them over into spirituality and get them to understand what it's actually talking about and how everything comes together. Because as I said earlier, spiritual teachings were written in code and entendre. You had to get a lot of information across, in a very small amount of time. But how do you do so? Well, in spiritual books, they're more like libraries because there's multiple books within them. That was stated by Dr. Jordan Peterson. And it was kind of like the first way of developing technology in the written language, kind of like an iPod. I could get all this information across in this one book that has many books in it, so on and so forth. And it can be understood by people who understand what's being said within the pages, that can interpret and understand the etymology of the words, so that they could have a better life and think better as they make their decisions within life and they question things, right? Because remember, they always need something to strive for tomorrow. So why not give them the tools to help them stand out and survive today? So, why do I say this? Well, because people are more free than they think. And what do I mean by this? Well, when I say people are more free than they think, if people are complaining about how much they make or whatever the case may be, you have to understand this. There's something called a currency conversion. So it's time to fly, ladies and gentlemen. So if you're working with the euro, the pound, or the US dollar, you have to understand you have more purchasing power in different places around the world that can benefit you, and you can live the life that you've been looking to live because of the currency conversion. This is what I mean by people are more free than what they actually think. So if you haven't learned anything from this class, learn this, right? If You learn about the world gets a chance to learn about you. This is the power of social media, right? You get a chance to experience a part of the world, and then of course if you make content, the world gets to learn a little bit about you. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, that depends on the type of person you are, what you're trying to show people versus what you actually could show people. And then of course, does it match up? Are you just putting on a show and a facade for people to get the attention, but they're not getting to know you? And you don't want to have that because it creates a disconnect when you meet up with them in person or they get to meet you in person. So, if you are trying to make it in the world, so on and so forth, now's the time to travel, especially as I said earlier, if you get paid by the US dollar, the euro, or the pound because of the purchasing power that you have in different countries. Now you may need to learn another language, or you can go to a country that speaks, somewhat English, or teach English in another country, get paid in euros, pounds, or the US dollar, and live a beautiful life. That's the goal, right? To be free, to have enough money to survive so that you get out of scarcity mode, so that you could stop trying to live in survival mode or paycheck to paycheck. Now, the caveat is if you work remotely, this is both a creative and logical endeavor. Would you not agree? I mean, think about it. Businesses can save and make money at the same time if they think outside the box. Okay, we don't have employees in our office, but we're still renting out office space, or we own the building. Okay, well, then convert the building into part residential, and then the parts that you're not using that was former office space, you can put that into a co working facility, and now you can cater to people that want to work and live in the place that they're at, so on and so forth. So now you have rent coming in on a monthly basis, right? The monthly reoccurring revenue from the rent of the people that are renting the apartments. And then, of course, the rent of those that want to get a co-working space set up, so on and so forth, whether that's a desk, whether that's a chair, whether that's an actual office in the space. But you have multiple outs or multiple streams of income when it comes to that property. And the people that are working remotely, you don't have to spend so much money on the fact that they're not in the office anymore, so on and so forth. And as a trade-off, they get to move to wherever is financially beneficial for them. Not only that, if they moved somewhere outside the United States, they're still a US citizen, they could get more for their money, you could get the job done, and you retained US citizens as employees, and you don't get dinged by everybody falling into the trap that they're outsourcing jobs, etc. So that's a little bit of outside the box thinking. That's for some of you business folks that are watching this, but think about that for a second. It would be a win-win scenario if your remote working employees that, get paid a US salary in US currency live in some place like the Philippines, so on and so forth, or somewhere in Latin America where the currency conversion benefits them dramatically. Now they can live the life that they want to live, and you could get the job done that you need to get done with American assets or American employees. So let's touch on the last thing here, because I don't want this to be a long class, but if you haven't seen it, I have something called Finding Freedom. Finding Freedom is a way to utilize AI in your everyday life to help you find freedom. And I wanted to share with you in this video one of the rules from Finding Freedom called the rule of 1%. So if you're in business, if you're in entrepreneurship, or you just simply thought that you could sell some stuff, you have to remember this. There's close to 7 billion people in the world in its entirety, if not closer to 8, right? You only need 1% of those people to purchase from you. Now, I don't know the numbers here off the top of my head, but in the United States alone, we have about 300 million people. You just need 1% of those people. If you had 10%, that would be 30 million. So you're looking at 3 million people. Now, if you sell something for $20 or $30, that's 3 million people times 20. How much is that? Now you're a millionaire. Now you can do whatever it is that you want. But you're not going to get there if you don't introduce yourself to the world, and the world doesn't have a chance to meet you. So remember, now that you understand this, you have to think about it. Do the math. Whatever it is that you have, or whatever skill or ability that it is that you have, if you could apply it online, you only need 1% of the population in order to get you out of wherever you are so that you can move on in life. Now, to wrap this up, Let's talk about the meaning of the number 20 because, well, I was going to do this yesterday, but being that it's the 21st, I heard the planets are aligning today, the planetary alignment. If you ever seen Lara Croft, there's something special that happens when all the planets are on one side. It kind of reminds me of the movie Hook, where he draws the line in the sand and everybody comes over to the side behind him and he realizes, oh, you are the pan. It's kind of like a rare moment, as they would say, right? So one of the cool things is that the 20th letter of the alphabet, if I remember correctly, is the letter T, which I thought time at first, but then again, if I did this yesterday, it would make sense because Donald Trump, is now the 47th president. In numerology, the number 20 is associated with diplomacy, cooperation, and harmony, and symbolizes the union of two entities working together, i.e., balance and partnerships. And then, of course, it also means patience and growth. It signifies a period of waiting and preparation for something significant. Now, when it comes to numerology, it's used all around the world in different spiritual teachings, so on and so forth. What's funny is that most people talk about, Christ coming back and everything like that, but they didn't realize that there might be some other stuff that might happen prior to, which is always written out because we live our life on a story. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm going to use a little bit of creativity, logic, and art here to tell you a story. If Christ was going to come back, don't you think he would send somebody in before him to make sure that nothing would happen to him again? And that person that took the role of going out there to see what would happen gave a good insight. It was like reporting back. It's like, okay, the general's going to come out here, so on and so forth, etc. But before the general goes, we're going to send all the intel people out. I'm using military terms here to investigate what would happen if they caught the general. Now we're going to find out exactly what they would do. Now that we know, now we could set up precautions moving forward because, well, let's just face it, in psychology, if Jesus Christ did come back, they'd probably put him into a freaking mental health hospital and call him bipolar. So let's move forward, right? In tarot, the 20th card is judgment. So for those of you who like to play with oracle cards, tarot cards, angel cards, whatever, the 20th card is judgment, representing renewal, awakening, and reckoning. Now, when it comes to religion and spirituality, the Bible, the number 20 is associated with waiting and completion. For example, the Ark of the Covenant remained in, how do I say this? Karathath for 20 years. 1 Samuel 7:2. You can look it up. But it was there for 20 years. In time and calendar, you might remember Abraham Lincoln stating 7 years ago, right? Well, a score is 20 years in total, right? So that's where that comes from. So 7 years ago, 87 years ago, give or take, so on and so forth. Then when it comes to cycles and patterns in the Mayan calendar, 20 is the basis of their system, right? So that's how they would go through it in the calendar. In science and measurement, so on and so forth, the periodic table, 20 the 20th element is essential for life, which is known as calcium. And a lot of you who study science, biology, so on and so forth, etc., knows that a lot of things in this world, including human beings, need things like calcium, which comes from a variety of different plants, etc. And then for those of you who are into aviation, so on and so forth, you heard of 20/20 vision, which signifies clarity and having perfect vision. When it comes to sociology, every 20 years we have what's known as a generational cycle, meaning we have the boomers, we have millennials, we have Gen Z, and now we have, I think it's called Alpha generation, so on and so forth. So these are the connections and the things that, I want to bring to your attention. But understand this. Everything is not only connected, but there's an explanation for the things that occur. Don't let everybody else tell you what's going on when they don't know. And then don't let the ones that know, that don't have understanding, tell you that they understand because they're scared to ask questions. Because remember this, those who have knowledge normally wish to possess it in order to control and have power over others. Whereas there's another group of people that have wisdom and wish to go ahead and bestow knowledge onto others so that they can have power and control in their own life. And that's what I'm trying to do with class, a way of thinking better. So if you got anything out of this video, please go ahead and subscribe and smash that like button. I will see you in lesson 21, the first lesson of art within class. Take care. Until next time, my friends. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.